Blog Talk Radio.
This is the Light of Truth radio broadcast with Michael Boldea.
All right, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us. This is the Light of Truth radio broadcast. I am your host, Michael Boldea, and although we are not live because, well, last week we almost didn't do a program. We were a few minutes late because we were trying to work out some technical difficulties. I decided it would be the prudent thing to come on with you and record. It is the same day. Today is... we're in August already, kids. So it's August the 6th, 2020. Remember back in the beginning of March when we were supposed to all stay in our basements and, eat canned beans for 2 weeks because it would flatten the curve and then we can go back to normal? Well, cheers. It's August. And things are not letting up. Certain states are getting more draconian. We talked about it last week. Wisconsin has enacted a mask mandate. It went over just about as well as lead balloon, or I don't know, Bill Clinton in a college dorm. It didn't jive. Nobody's doing it. People are just whatever. This is insane. This is stupid, because very few people know people who've actually known somebody to have actually died from the coronavirus. And we've been through it for enough time where we realize, all right, you get it, you get a little bit of the sniffles, you get a cough, you may get a fever. Now, if you're 103 years old, let's say if you're Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's fought cancer like 76 times, who's probably, half android by now, who's being kept alive by just hatred of Donald Trump, apparently. That woman does not want to go into that good night. She is clinging to life like nobody's business. And she doesn't want to retire because that would mean a vacancy in the Supreme Court. I will make a prediction, though. Whichever way the election goes, I think shortly after the election, come January or February, old Ruth will release this mortal coil. Because, man, it must be hard to hang on. Because every other day there's something going wrong with her body. She's in chemo. She's getting caught up. There's more surgery. There's more removal of tumors. But you got to hand it to the old gal. If they could bottle the hate that she has, it would provide longevity for a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff to cover. I'm getting a little burnt out on the coronavirus because we're realizing what it is now. If ever it was about public health, if ever it was about keeping the public safe, it's not anymore. It's about control. It's a power grab. And it still surprises me the age range of people who submit without question. When I'm walking anywhere, it's the 20-somethings and 35 and below that are being very obedient sheeple, that are being very subservient, that are doing exactly what they're told. They're driving with masks in their car with their windows up. Things that make you scratch your head and wonder, why are you still alive, or how are you still alive? And then you have, the war veterans. You have guys that are walking around with Vietnam vet hats that should have some level of concern because of their age, because of the things they've seen, they've gone through, because of their perhaps compromised health, because Agent Orange wasn't that, it wasn't Tang by any means. But they refuse to cower. They refuse to live in fear, and I respect them. I walk down the street, I see one of these, old salty guys, and they nod their head at me, and I nod my head at them, and we have a moment. It's call it civil disobedience, call it whatever you want, but we have our moment, and it's fun to spot people who realize that this is a sham. that this is not Ebola. If you have to get tested for something in order to know that you have it, come on. It's not really that bad now, is it? So, New York, if you still live in New York, I can't help you. If you haven't packed up, moved out, and set the place ablaze, I don't know what to say. I guess you're more of an optimist than I am. But now New York is putting up checkpoints. If you want to come into the city through any of the, I guess, bridges or tunnels, they're setting up checkpoints. And you have to give your information. Yeah, give your information. Who are you? Where do you come from? Please tell us where you will be, because we must come to visit you to make sure that you are alone and quarantining. So this is what New York City is doing. Now, New York City is doing this at a time when anyone that could afford to get out has gotten out, and they don't want to come back. I heard something on the radio in passing yesterday that Governor Cuomo, the most intelligent man in his own mind, him and his little brother Chrissy, who is a CNN anchor and perhaps one IQ point away from being declared legally dead. He's begging the rich to return to New York so he can scalp them for tax money. And the rich are going, nah, we're okay. They've left the city. A lot of them have gone to Connecticut. They've gone to Vermont. They've gone to places where they're not hassled and harassed by government, where the governor isn't all in on the idea of burning his own city to the ground to appease hooligans. So they've taken it upon themselves to find safer pastures, if not greener. And right now, the city of New York and the state of New York is hurting. And they're hoping and praying and hoping that federal money will make its way to New York so that it will cover up for the utter morality. Is that even a word, morality? No, it's not. Morality is not a word. Utter idiocy. There you go. That is a word. That the government of Bill de Blasio and Cuomo have been to the city and the state of New York. They're hoping that federal money will bridge the gap of, what is it, a $30 billion deficit? They ran a $30 billion deficit in a state and a city that makes up, 10% of the U.S. Economy. How do you do that? How incompetent do you have to be to run up that kind of debt? But nevertheless, they did it, and now they're hoping that, the people they look down on, if you ain't from New York, you ain't nothing. People from Tennessee and Kentucky and Florida, they're hoping their federal tax dollars will kick in to help them dig themselves out of the hole they've dug themselves into. Now, gracious and giving and charitable as I might be, I say nay. Because the only way that the people will learn to vote these morons out of office is if they feel the pain. If they are forced to sleep in the bed that their elected officials have made. That's the only way. Because otherwise, this will just happen over and over again, and Bill de Blasio is going to get elected over and over again. If your city has no money, if you're running a deficit of $30 billion, do you really think that the best way to spend your tax basis money is to write Black Lives Matter in uber large print in front of Trump Tower just to, get a rise out of Trump? Look, Bill de Blasio is incompetent. Governor Cuomo is incompetent. They are buffoons, they are morons, and the only people dumber than them are the people who voted them into office. And that's the truth of it. And if you live in a state that's allowing looting and burning and robbing and shooting and all these things, if you're living in a state where your elected officials are allowing you to feel unsafe in your own home or walking down your own sidewalk, and you don't vote them out of office next election cycle, you deserve what you got. Period. End of story. So, yes, back to the checkpoints. They will be checking people coming into New York. How long before they enact some sort of mandate to not allow people to leave New York? Because that's the problem right now. There ain't nobody coming in. There's a bunch of people going out. U-Haul will pay you a premium to haul something into New York so they could rent the truck and somebody pops back out. They've run out of everything. You cannot rent a moving truck. You cannot rent a moving van in New York because so many people have jumped ship. And it's only going to get worse. Listen, only going to get worse. Because when criminals realize that there is no law, when criminals realize that there is no order, when criminals realize they can do whatever they want and get away with it, it gives them license to continue committing crime. I will be sipping my delicious hot beverage in 1 second, so stand by. That's good coffee. No, they're not a sponsor, and so I'm not going to tell you who it is, but it's not Folgers in your cup. If you still drink Folgers, then you're a better man than I, because that is gut rot on steroids. I know you've all heard about what happened in Beirut. I don't think that we have to get into it. As of yet, there's a lot of speculation. As of yet, there's a lot of supposition. There are people coming out with theories left and right. What I do know is that I've seen fireworks go off, and they never made that big a hole. Sorry, it doesn't matter how many fireworks you have in a place, they're not going to make that kind of hole. But I'm sure the story will come out, or at least the story they want you to know. Personally, I think if this was a message, they got the message loud and clear. But I don't believe that any external nation would allow for that much collateral damage. I hope that makes sense. The collateral damage was just too much. There were too many dead for this to make sense as far as it being just a message. But we've got our own problems at home. We have our own issues to deal with. I think if the current situation has taught us anything, it's that if we don't manage our own backyard, it's kind of pointless to point out the weeds in the neighbor's yard. So we need to focus inward, and we need to acknowledge and realize what's happening to our nation. Because right now, you have people that will potentially be president within the next 6 months, even less. Talking about giving the money that police would make, defunding them, and hiring social workers because they can handle situations that cops can't. So again, I'm not going to go into Joe Biden's mental decline because it's obvious to all. He asked the reporter if he was on crack the other day. Or if he was, something along those lines. If he was doing cocaine, or if he was a junkie, because there's nothing like latent racism to make you call a person of color a junkie just because they pushed back on your stupid answer, just because they asked you if you've taken a cognitive test, and then you lied either this time or when they asked you last time and you said yes all the time. So, but let's not get into that. The thing of it is this. I don't believe Now, I could be wrong, because, Joe Biden's had to tussle with some pretty tough fellas. He had to, make Popcorn back down, and Popcorn was a tough dude. However, I don't believe Joe Biden's ever seen someone just off their rocker on bath salts. Never mind high on LSD or PCP or crack cocaine. I don't believe he's ever seen somebody take a bite of their own arm, chew and swallow because they were just so high off their gourd. Because if he says social workers can deal with that kind of stuff with a pen and a clipboard, then his mental decline is more acute than even I surmised. You need police to police. Because I'm going to let you in on a little secret, and then we're going to get back into 1 Samuel 17, because I really do want to get through it by the end of the year. Just because you defund police, it doesn't mean that criminals stop committing crimes. It's not as though criminals committed crimes simply because police existed and they wanted to give them something to do. It's not as though criminals committed crimes because they saw a police car and a man in uniform wearing a gun and go, oh, he looks like he's lazy. He looks like all he does is eat donuts all day. So what I'm going to do is go into this store, punch the teller in the face, take all the cash and run. That way that officer will get some exercise. Run off that donut. No, criminals have always existed. Criminality has always existed. And when you allow criminals to be criminals and to commit crime, it only exacerbates the situation. What that means in simple terms is that if you do not punish the criminal, there will be more criminals to commit crime because they realize there is no consequence to the crime that they commit. Why do you think there's so little crime in Middle Eastern countries? Because if you get caught stealing, there's a man with a dull saber that'll take away a hand. Literally. You don't get to go to jail for a little bit, 3 meals and a cot. No. They put your hand on a butcher block, and hopefully the guy's strong enough to make a clean cut. Because if he's not, he's going to have to hack at it. But I guarantee you, if you lose one hand, chances are you won't be stealing anything more with the other. Because, you need at least one hand to pull up your pants. So, the only way criminality gets curbed is by there being consequences and severe consequences to criminality. Why do you think Mayor Giuliani was able to clean up New York? Because he got tough on crime. He didn't allow criminals to do what they wanted. He got on crime. And New York transformed within a decade. Because it used to be what it's turning into again. A crime-infested pit. And right now, all the, uber-liberal rich people on Park Avenue, who thought they were sheltered and protected from the criminality that, the poor folk had to endure, are realizing that there's no barrier. People don't stop north of Park Avenue and not come in. They're getting robbed in front of multi-million-dollar homes. Billionaires' kids are getting the snot beat out of them. And I don't believe in my heart of hearts that these people are so sold on the idea of Marxism that they're willing to see their own kids suffer in order to achieve it. At least for the vast majority. There are some who are zealous. There are some who would gladly just give up any future their kids might have in order to achieve the glorious Marxism. But for the most part, people know. Because for the most part, I'm hoping I'm believing, I'm hoping that people still love their kids enough to try and provide them the best future possible. There are other things we could be talking about. Actually, we are. Let's get into this. Because if you go to our YouTube channel, this is not a plug, but there's a lot of content. About a month and a half ago, I spoke at a church in Michigan, and I reminded everyone there that eventually it will be the church that will be under fire. Eventually, it'll come around to the persecution of the church because the enemy has always had one enemy, the church. It started with, burning Bibles in Portland. I know you may have not heard of it because it's mostly peaceful, but they're burning Bibles along with the American flag in Portland. Finally, and again, theologically, I don't agree with everything that John MacArthur teaches, but you got to give it to the man. He's got principle. You've got to give it to the man. He's standing up for what he knows to be true and right. So after a protracted and prolonged closure, John MacArthur and his Grace Community Church in L.A. finally decided to open up. They go, this is ridiculous. How long are we expected to stay closed? Well, the state, being the state, was none too happy with that. So, now Pastor John MacArthur and the Grace Community Church is being threatened. It says that they've been served a letter from the city threatening to impose a $1,000 fine if the church does not comply with Governor Gavin Newsom's order for some churches in the state to be shuttered because of the coronavirus. State has absolutely no power to impose the restrictions it is demanding. Jenna Ellis, one of the attorneys representing the church, said in a report to the Federalist website, "This is not about health and safety. It is about targeting churches. Ding, ding, ding. Someone finally gets it. Everyone who's been compliant for so long, everyone who's stayed closed and kept their head down and hid in their basement, hoping that this thing will pass over, is beginning to realize that it's not passing over because it's not about public health. The church is the target." Are we seeing the picture yet? Do we need a little more time? How bad does it need to get for the average Christian to open their eyes and realize what's going on? How bad does it need to get for the average Christian to stand up and go, no, we will not comply with this because it's ludicrous? In mid-July, Newsom ordered churches in 30 counties, including LA County, to stop holding indoor services, but MacArthur refused to comply, saying that Jesus Christ, not the state government, is the head of the church. Bravo. When any government official issues orders regulating worship, such as bans on singing, cap on attendance, or prohibitions against gatherings and services, he steps outside the legitimate bounds of his God-ordained authority as a civic official and arrogates to himself that authority that God expressly grants only to the Lord Jesus Christ as sovereign over his kingdom, which is where it goes from here. We do not know. They've threatened with, $1,000 a day fine, but it would be counterproductive for them to back down now. It would be counterproductive for them to cry uncle, as it were. So I hope they continue to stand. I hope they continue to fight, because if no one stands, then by definition, we've all bowed. And if we've all bowed, then we are all subservient to people who will not be content with your subservience. They don't want you broken. They want you destroyed. Understand that. So, with that happy 25-minute intro, let's get back into 1 Samuel chapter 17 and see what more we can learn. We haven't even met David yet. We've still covered the introduction. We're going to read the first few verses just so we contextualize what's going on. And then we shall proceed from there. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Soshach, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Soshach and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with a valley between them. And we got some really good nuggets of wisdom from just those 3 verses for the past couple of episodes. But as we continue into the chapter, we will realize that our leaders, our elected officials, if you will, our kings and our princes, will fail us more often than not. When we look to them for leadership in times of crisis, when we look to them for leadership, when leadership is necessary, that is when they tend to fizzle out. And this is why, even if every move isn't perfect, even if every decision isn't spot on, I respect the leadership of this current president in times of crisis. Whether you like him or you hate him, you can't deny it that he's at the forefront. He's trying. But here was Saul and his armies gathered together, encamped in the valley of Elah. And there was no discernible leadership. As we read last time, both Saul, the king of Israel, and Israel were dismayed and greatly afraid at the sight of one man. But let's read on. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. Now, I did my due diligence in between programs, and 5,000 shekels of bronze is 41 kilograms, or around 91 pounds. So that was just his coat of armor, and it weighed 91 pounds. And apparently with 91 pounds on his back, he had enough mobility where it wasn't uncomfortable. And there's something that someone pointed out, and it was just 91 pounds of shekels. It didn't account for the brass greaves and the helmet and everything else. So this wasn't just a tall man at 9 feet 5 inches. This was also a very, sturdy man. He was very well built by all intents. And he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. So just the spearhead was close to 10 pounds. Think on that. Take a 10-pound weight and just bounce it on your hand and realize just the head of his spear was 10 pounds. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle?" Now, we could take this declaration one of two ways. Either Goliath was perplexed as to why they just lined up for battle and not attacked. He's like, "Why are you here? If you're going to do it, do it. If you're going to fight, fight. It's nice that you're all standing in line, but do something." Or he realized that they were ill-prepared for the fight. They didn't have the stomach for it. And he was mocking them. "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." So Goliath was certain of his fighting skill. He was certain of his ability to overpower any adversary, to the point that he made this declaration: "Send anybody. I don't care who it is. Just send somebody down here. We'll have a tussle. One of us will die. And the camp of the person who dies serves the other." Now, if there was any doubt in Goliath's mind that he would prevail, if there was any doubt in Goliath's mind that he would be victorious, he wouldn't have made this declaration. But again, seeing Israel's reaction, seeing that they were dismayed and greatly afraid, Goliath was imposing enough to stir fear in their hearts. And in verse 12 of 1 Samuel 17, we meet David for the first time. Now, David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. So Saul had stirred up enough passion in the people, and the people saw the danger for what it was that they lined up for battle. But there wasn't enough faith or boldness or courage there to pull the trigger. There wasn't enough faith or courage or boldness to proceed with battle. And when they saw what they were facing, when they saw their adversary, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So even before we see his faith, even before we see his prowess with a slingshot, we see David's work ethic. Apparently, David hustled harder than anybody else. He went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem, even though he was the youngest. Why couldn't they take turns? Well, I realized he was the youngest. But if he didn't have the work ethic he did, he might have convinced his father to send one of his brothers to feed the sheep at Bethlehem once in a while. Yet here was David not complaining. He didn't make a big deal about it. He just went and fed his father's sheep. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. If it's one thing that Goliath understood, it was the propaganda of fear. If it's one thing Goliath understood, is that in order to keep your enemy afraid, you must continue fueling their fear with consistency. So for 40 days, every morning and every evening, Goliath would present himself. He would come out in his armor. He would come out with his helmet. He'd come out with his spear and his 10-pound spearhead. They would see that imposing figure of the Philistine, and he would give his speech. Because if it was once a week, or if it was monthly, eventually the memory of Goliath would have faded in the soldiers of Israel. Eventually, perhaps, one of them would have actually gotten up the courage to say, maybe we could take him. Maybe he has a weakness. Maybe he's not that big. But because every morning and every evening Goliath was out there presenting himself, it kept the fear constant. And this is what is happening today. They are attempting to keep the fear constant. If you still watch the news, which most people aren't anymore, you will see that every single day there's some new angle. You will see that every single day there's some new story that is intended to make you afraid, that is intended to keep you fearful. Whether it's the first death in Vietnam, who cares? The person was, what was it? They had kidney issues, they had liver problems, and they died. People die every day. 65,000 people die of the flu every year in America. So let's not get it twisted. But this is what they do. They try to keep fear fed, fomented. Cases are rising. Okay, but how many did you test? How about hospitalizations? Nope, going down. How about mortality? Nope, going down. But man, cases are rising. But you're testing more than ever before. But that's not the point. Cases are rising. They're doing what Goliath did. Every morning and every evening, they are presenting fear as Goliath presented himself. And the people remain afraid. Then Jesse said to his son David, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain, and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them." Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. So Jesse, the father, assumed that his sons were at war already. They went off to fight. They must be a-fighting. He assumed that they were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. Instead, for 40 days, they were listening to Goliath mock them, mock their God, mock their warriors, and they shut up and took it because they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Because Goliath understood human psychology, and he understood that he could keep them afraid and no one would come down. And that's another thing that we need to keep into account. What if David would have been there for the 40 days? Would he have been as brave, having gone through the psychological warfare for 40 days of seeing Goliath and seeing his threats? But we'll get into that later. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp, and the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. So they were pumping themselves up, but they had been for 40 days. Think about that. For 40 days, they pumped themselves up. We're going to win. We're the best. God's got an army marching through the land. Same thing. They were shouting for the battle, but none of them had taken to the battlefield. Now, that's a deep one, kids. They were shouting for the battle, but none of them had taken to the battlefield. Because posturing is easy. Fighting is hard. It's easy to stand there and clang your sword against your shield. Totally different feeling when you catch a glancing blow and you don't know where it came from. The church, by and large, today is posturing. They're shouting for the battle, but they're scared out of their wits for the actual fight. And what they don't realize is that whether they take to the battlefield or the enemy advances to their line, sooner or later they're still going to have to fight. Again, David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle, as they had been for 40 days. And still no fighting. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. Apparently this was a thing now. They did it, then somehow they withdrew. Somehow they didn't have the stomach. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. But what happened? Just a minute ago, you were going out to the fight and fighting for what? Shouting for the battle. What happened? You finally got a glimpse of the enemy? And now you are fleeing and being dreadfully afraid? Is that it? What happened, O brave soul? What happened, you who would conquer the nations for Jesus? You got a glimpse of the enemy and you got scared because all the shouting for the battle, all the going out to fight, and we're going to win back the country for the Lord. That was all well and good before you got a glimpse of the enemy. And if you think you can do great exploits for God without facing the enemy, then you're fooling yourself. If you think you can attempt to conquer the darkness without the darkness fighting back as hard as it can, then you're fooling yourself. If you think the darkness isn't wily, if you think it's not smart, if you think it's not feeling out your weaknesses each and every day, then you're fooling yourself. And every other week now, man, you hear about some pastor, some televangelist, some very popular, anointed of the Lord, who done got done because they underestimated the enemy and they let their guard down. They underestimated the enemy and they thought it was enough to shout for the battle. And then the enemy blindsided them. And so now they have to write letters of apologies to their congregation and to their wives for, as they put it, moment of weakness. You fell into sin. You fell into sin because you weren't being watchful. You fell into sin because you were more interested in projecting an image of being a warrior than actually being a warrior. Because if your armor was up and your helmet was on and your shield was strapped and your sword was in hand, guess what? You wouldn't have fallen. You wouldn't have had a moment of weakness. You would have been too busy fighting. You would have been too busy conquering. But it's all about projecting strength now. It's not really about being strong. It's all about projecting warriorhood. I am the general in the Lord's army. Well, general, you done stepped in it. And it wasn't because God failed you. I'm trying to be nice here. I'm trying to word it in such a way where I still show a little grace. But man, don't try to sugarcoat it. You fell into sin because you weren't being watchful. You gave in to temptation because you weren't being about the kingdom. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was sin. Don't underestimate the enemy. But by the same token, don't let the enemy get so big in your mind that you're paralyzed with fear even before you set foot on the battlefield. Because Goliath had gotten into Israel's head from Saul on down. And every single one of them had the same reaction when they saw this man. They were fearful. They were afraid. They fled from him. So what we learned today, hopefully, is an important lesson. It's not enough to shout for the battle. It's not enough to pump yourself up. It's not enough to pretend at being warriors. At some point, you have to take to the battlefield. And when you take to the battlefield, you will come face to face with the enemy. And the enemy will be large, and the enemy will be something not to be taken lightly. But if in your heart of hearts, you know that the Lord is with you, you will not flee, nor will you be dreadfully afraid. We'll continue this next week, and this is when it gets good. This is the part that I always liked hearing my grandpa tell me. Because I grew up on Bible stories, Moses and David and Daniel and Samson. And for the last few nights before bed, my oldest daughter and I have story time. And it used to be when she was younger, I'd make up stories about, naughty rabbits who ran away from foxes and things like that. But now, every night, she asks me for a Bible story. And so we've gone through Daniel and we've gone through David. And if you have kids, sow the seed of the word in their heart while they're young. Because the world is doing its best to separate your children from God and to separate you from your children. Look, there's a deeper reason why schools, church, family, God, and the Bible have become public enemy number one. There's a reason there's an all-out push to do away with the notion of morality and decency. Because the enemy knows that if seed is not planted in the heart of the young when they are young, with each passing year it becomes increasingly more difficult to draw them to the truth, to draw them to the light. So David rose early in the morning. His father gave him a task, and he didn't dawdle. His father gave him a task, and he didn't put it off. He didn't send a servant, because apparently there were servants to be had. He left the sheep with another and went to do what his father told him to do, even though it was something banal, even though it was something lowly. David's father sent him to take food to his brothers who were on the battlefield. 'Twas not a glorious task. 'Twas not something that you would put on your resume. And yet David rose early in the morning. He left the sheep with the keeper and went and took the things as Jesse had commanded him. And this is the last lesson for the day, because we've gone through a lot in a little time. Whatever it is that God commands you to do, whether great or small, don't dawdle. Rise early and be about it. David was going to deliver food, some cheese, some grain, and some loaves of bread. And now his name will live in the annals of history forever. Had he not gone, the story may have been very different. And that's my parting thought. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. May God bless you. May God keep you. And Gino, if you've got anything to say, the floor is yours.
Amen. Thank you, Mike. First of all, we want to keep the people in Lebanon in prayer. 300,000 homeless, a lot of hurting people. I want to direct you to, again, our YouTube channel. If you want to look it up on the internet, it would be under Hand of Help Warnings. We have literally all different kinds of programs on there, as well as you can type in the Light of Truth radio broadcast with Michael Boldea or Light of Truth, Michael Boldea, and you can get over a year's worth of radio broadcasts. We've recently put up a video called Stand 2020. This was Michael's message that he gave Saturday night at our Stand 2020 rally in Wisconsin Dells, and powerful message on standing up, being bold, being strong. And we also had Sheriff Dale Schmidt speak and Rebecca Clayfish, who we hope will run for governor. But we've had a great turnout, great time standing up for the faith. Finally, you can go to handyhelp.com and check out our materials and things. But I would urge you, don't let fear come in, and don't let fear and unbelief and doubt come in and take away your faith in the power of God. God keeps us. God watches over us. God protects us. The Lord allows nothing over our life without his permission. So trust the Lord with all your heart. Lean not under your own understanding. Acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will direct your path. Have a great day in the Lord.